I have no problems popping people's bubbles about shared narratives that we have, culturally, which sometimes serve a purpose, but aren't necessarily true, right? And then when people find out they're false, all of their belief in everything is shattered. It's like, what else is a lie that you've told me?
In this interview, I had the opportunity to speak with David Pudwill about conspiracy and propaganda in the medical sphere. David spent a number of years in the FDA and is currently doing medical consulting. One final note before we get to the discussion proper, there are a number of images referenced in the episode, and I always put things that we mention or talk about in episodes, I put them, links to those in the show notes. So definitely go and check out the show notes for links to some of the things that we reference. So without further ado, here is my conversation with David Pudwill.
I'm David Pudwill, and I do medical device consulting for a number of companies. I've worked at FDA. I've worked for a couple different medical device manufacturers, and I've also known Derek for my just about my entire life. So that's some useful background, I think, maybe at a high level.
Yeah, you only want to say things that are going to give you credibility.
But knowing you for a very long time, doesn't that lend a degree of credibility? I don't know. Maybe we're colluding. There's something to be said for, I think, the path of the discussion here. But anyway,
it's true. Yeah. So we've been talking for a while. We talk every couple months, and so while I'm going through this propaganda season, I've been talking to you and bouncing some ideas off of you. And so, of course, when I got to the medical section of propaganda, you were the first person that came to mind to talk about maybe how you see propaganda or conspiracy or don't see it in the real world. So you shot me a bunch of different ideas, and you are the expert completely here in this episode. So why don't you go ahead and talk about your first impressions when I was talking to you and what came to mind?
Yeah. So, some of the first things that come to mind for me when we're thinking about conspiracy, and we've heard a lot of this language in the last couple of years, in particular, since we've had the pandemic situation with COVID, and there's a lot of things happening around FDA and and other government agencies, and my general views on this is that we've set up a lot of institutions, and those institutions and the way that they've operated have fundamentally eroded public trust in them and how they operate. And so there's a lot of grasping at straws as that happens, and as institutions that you've come to trust and rely on, as you find out the information you're getting from them is not as good as it used to be. Maybe it never was as good as you thought it was. And you start to go down these rabbit holes of questioning everything you've ever known. And that's a very common thing. I think once you find out one thing is false or some falsehood happened, it's like, okay, we're in December, right? And I don't teach my kids a whole lot about Santa Claus. They know about the guy, but they've always, for their entire lives, been the ones who showed up, and teachers complain because they're telling other kids that Santa Claus doesn't exist. It's like this kind of thing. All the other kids are like horrified, and the teachers are like, calming them down. No, don't worry about that, kind of thing. So, I have no problems popping people's bubbles about some like shared narratives that we have culturally, which sometimes serve a purpose, but aren't necessarily true, right? And then when people find out they're false, they've like all of their belief in everything is shattered. It's like, what else is a lie that you've told me? And so I think that's just a very common human reaction. So I've even had some of that myself, definitely over the course of the last couple of years, like, wait, what else is not true that we've been led to believe. But I've worked directly, within, government, institutions and within that bureaucracy. And, my view is mostly it's a systemic, kind of an issue in terms of how institutions are set up, how they interact. And one of my biggest concerns is the revolving door in the medical space between our government institutions and the industries that those institutions regulate, and also the flow of money that happens between the corporations and FDA and other groups in terms of funding for review of submissions. And a lot of people, can tell you, oh, well, that money is not tied to an outcome. To which I will tell you, but there is a percentage approval that FDA leadership expects, of these products. So any individual product may not have to be approved. They can disapprove that one individual product. But overall, there's an expectation that a certain percentage of products that go through FDA will get approved. And that means that if you are a very large company submitting a very large number of products, at some point you will get some of these products through and approved at a relatively high certainty. So
there's actually a quota?
Yes, there are quotas.
Oh, I would have just thought that, it either passes or it fails, like it's safer.
And it's not that the quota, again, a quota doesn't apply to any individual submission, but there is a sense overall, especially for clinical studies, that there's a certain percentage of those that are going to get approved at each round of review. So that drives certain incentive structures, right? And it's the same thing for overall products, that the incentive structures are set up at FDA where it's very difficult to disapprove a product and it's relatively easy to approve it. Now, that just from an FDA standpoint, I don't mean from a company standpoint. The company does need to do a lot of work to get a product approved or cleared in some cases. So there are different tiers that FDA will review and allow a product onto the market with. So we can call them all marketing authorizations, but they're not all approved. Like not all products are approved. But for those products that are approved by FDA, there are certain legal protections in many instances then for those companies, for those products that have now been reviewed by FDA. And it limits the ability of end users like you and me who may use that product to sue those manufacturers. So there's some limitations on liability. And we've seen that very much so with the vaccines, for instance. There's a lot of legal liability protection that's come into play with that.
Okay, so
yes, yeah, go ahead.
So basically, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, and we talked about this a little bit earlier too, where you said, well, you're not really a big conspiracy theorist, but when things get institutionalized, stuff happens. And I think George Carlin, when he was having a discussion with Bill Maher before, and he said
the big club, and you're not in it, but you were going to say
that too. But he said, you don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge.
Yes.
So it's okay. You've got a quota that needs to be filled. You've got a company that has the resources to do the legwork and pay all the financial burden of submitting, and they can submit a lot of things. Yes. And so, okay, maybe there's not a conspiracy where people are in the technical sense conspiring, but the system is sort of conspiring unintelligently, just the way that.
And I would say it's deeper than that too. And this is one thing for a lot of companies to keep in mind, is the relationship with FDA can at times be adversarial, but generally in the pre-market space, the FDA reviewer wants to see products approved because it is something that they can point to as having been a part of and having participated in. It's much harder to sell a disapproval as a win. It's much easier to sell, look, I helped this company get their product onto the market and approved. I was part of that team that got this product that now everybody's aware of approved on the market. There's a fundamental incentive for those people within FDA to see an approval. So it's even deeper than just, let's say, quotas, which I would say quotas maybe not quite the right terminology, but these are metrics. They're key process indicators, let's call them KPIs, that FDA tracks. And because that's something that they're tracking, everybody, internally is very much aware of that. And there's a pressure to some level, at least, to see more approvals. Now that can be managed in a positive way, let's say, which is that the reviewers at FDA can reach out to companies and let them know what evidence they need to be able to approve a product, right? And so you're not necessarily lowering the bar, but you are helping the company provide better evidence. But even then, if you have a predetermined level of evidence or set of information that you're looking for, we know statistically that, okay, let's say you're looking for a 95% confidence in the data set you have. What does that mean? That means 1 out of 20 times you will get a false positive, right? So if you have companies that are just throwing everything at the wall, occasionally you will get compelling evidence at a 90 or 95% confidence interval that is just pure happenstance that, a product that doesn't really work on a population level did happen to provide sufficient evidence that FDA is happy to look at it and put that on the market. And so we try to set those thresholds high enough that that's not a very common occurrence, but it's set at a point where it does happen in real life, and we see this. FDA looks at literally thousands of products every year. Maybe more if you're going to count, across various divisions and what they're, going out and inspecting. But in terms of new products that make it onto the market, in medical devices alone, there are about 4,000 products that go through what this 510K process at FDA, which is sort of a me too. I'm just like this other device that's already on the market. There are 4,000 of those products every year. And then there are another, let's say, 30 to 50 products that are truly novel that come onto the market every year. And that means even for the very novel products, at the kind of statistical confidence, levels that we expect, a couple of those products might make it to market and not actually work on a population level.